Hello everyone, I'm Becky Goldsmith and I want to give you some tips on the machine applique. So I'm doing a straight stitch along the edge of the prepared applique pieces. I'm using the 80 weight Aurifil cotton thread because if you use it in the matching colors, it blends so well. You can see it, but it will blend really easily with your quilting stitches. It's perfect. I did not have to adjust the tension on my machine, whether top or bobbin. I have the thread loaded in both places. If you have to adjust your tension, be sure to set up a practice piece before you just start in on your applique. I have on a Swan Amity quilting glove. These are primarily for machine quilting. They have a padded bottom and it's ultra suede and they work well. And what I'm finding is that they help me control the fabric. I'm only wearing one of the gloves. I want to have my other hand ungloved to manipulate the tool. The tool I'm using the most, besides the glove, is the smaller of the Applique rods, and you'll see how that works in just a minute. If you have to pin your applique down when you're getting ready to sew it, the Karen K. Buckley pins, these little very fine pins, are probably better for this than the bigger pins that I've got in other places. Those are there just to keep the applique held securely while I'm working. I'll switch to the bigger pin, the finer pins as I get to each shape. I have glued the applique along the underside of the turned under seam allowance to the block. The more I handle the block, the more likely it is that the glue will let go of that bond. But because that seam allowance has been glued down, it stays rigid enough that I'm not having a problem with the fabric moving. So here's how it looks. I've got my open-toed embroidery foot on the machine. And let me get it in position here. I'm going to move over just a bit. Now, I've got the same red thread loaded in the machine, and I've been able to do all four of these leaves together. When I get this one done, I'll cut the thread and move on to another set. But I just sewed from one to the next to get to here. Those stitches will be covered by the circle when I get to that part. Now, when you're using your open-toed embroidery foot, and I learned this from a student just recently, I had always sewn with the needle right in the center of the foot. It never occurred to me to move it. Well, as long as you have the more open throat plate underneath, you can move your needle to the right. Now, I didn't move it all the way to the right. It's on my machine, it's over just a little bit. But you can see that as I sew, I'm using the inside edge of this side of the open-toed foot to help guide my stitches. Now, I don't need to use the rod so much there. I want to hold this flat. And I have a knee lift on my machine, so I'm able to lift up without moving my hands. Now, when you get to the point, that's where you especially need this tool. What I want to do is take short stitches and keep your rod away from the action of the needle. But the rod helps hold that point down because otherwise when the needle goes up, it would pull the fabric with it. So now I'm going to hold it down. Sometimes, if you've sewn far enough, the end of the point will get stopped by this part of the foot. If that's the case, you can needle up and then move the point where you need it to be so that it'll sew. And oh, I'm glad that did that there. See how I just almost didn't catch that? You know what I'm going to do? Because this thread is so fine, I'm going to just change where that stitch went, just the tiniest little bit. Okay, lastly, you notice how I can sew with these pins here, and the pins are not lifting up the edge of the presser foot and distorting the piece. That's why the fine pins are very nice for this machine applique. All right, I will come back to you in just a little bit and show you how to do the inner points. I'm back and I'm about to sew the inner point on the frond. The problem with this, you know, is that when you get up here, there's almost no seam allowance. So when I get to about there, I'm going to stop and turn on. I'm going to raise my needle and I'm going to turn on my little bitty narrow zigzag. And I'm going to carefully, I'm going to lift that up and I want to move that over just a hair. I'm going to turn this shape under the needle just a little bit so that I can do sort of like a crow's foot here. You see how I'm turning it and letting the needle, when it goes to the right, go over to that inner point. Now I want to raise this up and pull that just a little bit this way. And now I want to go this way. Then I'm going to raise my needle and go, well, let's see here. I could go one, let's see, I want to go down and over. Then I'm going to narrow up my zigzag just a little bit more right there. That's probably enough. Now, because this thread is so fine, those stitches are going to be hidden enough. And I can sew on now where there's seam allowance. I didn't say earlier, but I'm using not a thick needle. I'm using a 7010 top stitch needle here. It's one of Superior's titanium coated needles. I really like it for this. I could maybe use a finer needle, but truthfully, I don't have another one in the drawer, so I'm using this one. What other news? Oh, I know, the other thing. My machine is not eating the machine applique. It's not getting sucked into the throat plate. If that's happening to you, a very quick and simple fix for that is to take a piece of regular gift wrap tissue paper and tear a piece that's about the size of whatever it is you want to sew. You don't have to glue it to it. You don't have to do anything to it. You can slide that underneath, and that tissue paper will prevent the fabric from being eaten by the machine. I thought I was going to have to use it on all of these, but I'm not having to, and I think it's because the glue is making the edge of the applique rigid enough that it doesn't get sucked into the machine. Now, if you do use the tissue paper, I would strongly suggest that you sew a piece, take the tissue paper off, and then repeat as long as you need to. Tissue paper is cheap, and it's much easier to remove if you've just sewn one shape to it, rather than if you've sewn a whole bunch. It just shreds it underneath, and it's a big mess to take off. So, those are my machine applique tips. I hope you enjoy this technique. I think it's really nice because it is so fast. I still am a hand appliquer at heart, but you know, there's sometimes when speed counts, and for those times, and for those of you who just prefer to sew on the machine, this is a really nice way to do it. So, enjoy your sewing. Thank you for watching.